Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Jeff Munn, and today we're going to discuss an important issue that affects everyone in Maricopa County: wood-burning smoke. Smoke from wood-burning fireplaces and chimeneas has negative health impacts on our residents. And if we don't curtail this problem, there could be stricter regulations for residents and serious economic consequences. That's why it's important to abide by the no-burn days. Joining me is Philip McNeely, Director of the Maricopa County Air Quality Department, and Eric Massey, the Director of the Air Quality Division at the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
There is a basic question I think that most residents might have right off the top, and it simply is, what is the issue and why is there need for a no-burn campaign?
Yeah, Jeff, and smoke contains really fine particles. We call them PM 2.5. And if you inhale the PM 2.5, it can pose a health risk to you. These particles are so small, they're smaller than a grain of flour. So when you inhale the smoke or these particles, it can get lodged into your lungs and actually absorb into your bloodstream. And so this is particularly bad for children and older adults, but also with people that have pre-existing conditions like bronchitis or asthma. So the federal EPA, they do set standards for this PM 2.5, and the standard set for 12 micrograms per meter cubed, which is a technical term, but we have a few monitors in the valley that we monitor year-round, but they've been hitting about 10 to 11 of the last few years. So we're right at we're very close to the health standard. So what we're trying to do is get the word out to the public that this is an issue to your neighbors. If you're burning smoke, it can cause health risks, and we want them to voluntarily reduce their burning, and then when we have no burn date, certainly comply with that.
Now you mentioned monitors, and for either of you gentlemen to respond to. Those monitors are what determines when you can burn and what days you can't, correct?
So those monitors are part of the component. So when you're looking at a monitor, you're looking at what's actually in the air, and you're taking a measurement. That information is used as well as our understanding of what meteorologically is going to happen across the valley over the next couple of days to anticipate when a day might actually be unhealthy for people to be outside or really to be breathing that kind of an air. And so what ends up happening is a combination of the monitored data, our knowledge of what's happened in the past under specific meteorological conditions are used to help us understand when we think no burn days are actually going to occur.
Now, we discussed this at the holiday time of year, and I assume that that's due to the climate at that particular time of year, correct?
That is correct. The holiday season and the winter season in particular is very difficult in the desert for anything that happens, especially overnight. And the reason for that is what we would call a temperature inversion. That is where the air up in, aloft over the surface is actually warmer than the air that's on the surface itself. And so what that does is essentially creates a lid over the Phoenix metropolitan area, trapping all of the air pollution that we generate in that particular space. And so when we have a lot of burning that occurs, and that's typical around the holiday season, we see actually a large number of increased burning situations. All of that air pollution just collects and sits right on top of us, creating the bad air that we see on the holidays.
You know, what's interesting to me is, as a native Phoenician, when I was a kid, we first got introduced to air pollution issues because of the large amount of cars driving to work. But what we see with the no burn issue is that it's at a greater risk of occurring on weekends and holidays, and it doesn't really involve directly the large amount of cars that are in use Monday through Friday.
And that's correct. Over the last few years, we've analyzed the data, and weekends are certainly worse than the holiday seasons than weekdays, but the holidays are even worse than the weekends. So specifically Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, and New Year's Day, we have very high spikes at our monitors. So, and we attributed this to families getting together for the holidays and lighting their fires. It's a natural thing to do, and we all do it. Mm-hmm. But what most people don't think about is that you're really impacting your neighbors and people that have pre-existing conditions. And I think so. What we're trying to do is really get the word out. So most people are neighborly, and if they know that they're causing their neighbors to go to the emergency room, think they probably would not burn their smoke if it's a no burn day.
Yeah, and if I can follow on that really quickly, I think that's a really key point that Director McNeely's hit on, which is that this is really about being a good neighbor. We're aware of a lot of the comments, and it does look to many number of people that this is a conspiracy. Hey, you're to being the Grinch, you're taking away our Christmas holiday fun. And the idea isn't to focus so much on the things that are being taken away or what we're asking you not to do on that no burn day, but it really is to focus on those people who have to spend their holiday either worried about being in a hospital or taking breathing treatments or some other way not being able to enjoy the holiday with their family the same way that we get a chance to do just because of the high air pollution concentration. So being a good neighbor is an exceptionally important part of this message.
I want to discuss the impact of not adhering to the standards that you try to follow, but I also want to take some time and just get our audience up to speed on the do's and don'ts basically of no burn. And I was looking through the notes I have, and I've always been curious as to, does no burn include things like outdoor barbecues? Because we are in Arizona, it's not unusual for people to want to grill even in the dead of winter.
Yeah, so there is an exemption for food. So if you have a barbecue and you're cooking food, legally you're exempt. But we would ask too, to be a good neighbor, if it's a no burn day, can you maybe cook inside or not use your barbecue? But any wood burning is covered. So in the fireplace, outside fires, all that is, anything burning wood is covered by this no burn campaign.
That's right, and burning charcoal would fall under some of those same categories. But I think one of the key components is what we're asking people is don't burn wood or similar types of products on that no burn day. So please don't think about burning wood. Please don't burn wood.
Right.
Don't burn those paraffin logs because they're not much better. Charcoal's also out. But if you are going to grill, think about trying to use propane. Try to think about natural gas. Both of those burn much cleaner, and they're not covered by those no burn days.
I'm glad you brought up the artificial logs, and I don't know if artificial is quite the word I want to use, but things like Duraflame, while they have components in them that make it look very appealing to the eye, it still has a wood component that does lead to a pollution problem.
That's absolutely right. And I think the science behind it shows that while a single log might actually emit a little bit less than wood itself would, it doesn't put out as much heat. And so people tend to burn 2 or 3 times the amount of wood to get the same amount of heat that they would out of the fire, thereby negating any potential benefits that would come out of it. And so in those cases, rather than going through a long and extensive discussion about how each different log might burn, it's just better to say, please don't burn anything that resembles wood. Think about propane, think about natural gas.
The best way for the public, and it's not just simply a matter of looking out your door and saying, wow, it looks kind of soupy out there today, I'm not going to burn. There are obviously very convenient ways that both of your agencies have put together to alert the public as to when it is a no-burn day.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you'll hear it on if we call a no burn day the county, you'll hear it on your TV and radio ads, PSAs. But also you can, we have a mobile app, Clean Air Make More. You can actually download that, and that gives you daily air quality data too, so you can use it 12 months out of the year. So you can download your app, Clean Air Make More. You can call a no burn hotline, I'm going to read it for you, 602-506-6400. So if we have a no burn day, you can call that hotline. It'll tell you if it's a no burn day or not. And you can also go to our webpage, cleanairmakemore.com. So, but you'll be hearing about it on the radio or TV. If it's a no burn day, we get the word out as much as we can using social media.
I'd say that's exactly right. I mean, communication is one of the biggest issues here. We've done surveys, and 64% of the population that knows a no burn day is coming actually changes their behavior because they're aware of the issue. And so how do we get that message out to people? That's the big question in all of this. I always like to tell a story about my father and these particular issues. It's now a decade ago, and we've solved the problem, but I remember visiting him on Christmas Day. Hey, how was Christmas Eve? Well, your sister came over, we had a fire. I'm like, Dad, time out. Do you know what I do? I'm an air quality compliance guy at the time, right? You need to call me. It was a no burn day last night, right? And so it emphasizes the point for me that if my father, who knows an air quality professional, didn't know it was a no burn day, how do we get that message out? And so we're trying to make it easier. Things like the Clean Air Make More app, cleanairmakemore.com. There are email lists. There are text messaging alerts that you can sign up for off of their webpage or off of ADEQ's webpage. So we're trying to make that message a lot easier for people to see, understand, and get that information about it being a no burn day.
And this program is also a very good way to get the message out. When we come back, we'll talk more about the impact to you as an individual of bad air quality and why it's so important to adhere to no burn days. And we'll do that after this break. The average person breathes in nearly 3,000 gallons of air a day. Air pollutants such as smoke can seriously affect your health, and especially the health of small children, senior citizens, or anyone with respiratory conditions like asthma. Welcome back. We spent a great deal of time in this program so far talking about wood burning and how it's important to adhere to no burn days because of the health and economic impact that could be suffered if those standards are not adhered to. But I also want to talk a little bit about the time of year, and we mentioned in the first subject, gentlemen, about the holidays. I was telling a story about driving home one particular New Year's Eve a couple of years ago down the 51 at the short stack, and I was struck, it was about 12:30 in the morning, by the immense amount of smoke. You have monitors throughout the valley. Are there certain parts of the valley during the no burn season, quote unquote, that are worse than others?
Yeah, typically from the wood burning, it's South Phoenix. And part of that reason is a lot of the older homes have wood burning fireplaces. Since 1998, all new homes built do not have wood burning fireplaces. They're either natural gas. So most of the concentrations are around the older neighborhoods where they actually burn wood throughout the holiday season.
That's right, and I think there's a meteorological component that happens with that as well.
Right.
If you think about air and you think about gases, they act like a fluid. They always take the shape of their container, and so what they're going to do is find the lowest point. And we live in a valley. The lowest point happens to be where our river basins are. So it's also not a surprise that all of the burning that happens around the valley will actually ultimately collect in the right along the river, which is also in the South Phoenix area. So not only do you have an emission issue in the area, but burning that happens even in the northern parts of the valley will ultimately end up in that particular area, causing additional problems for residents.
Now, we've talked a lot about wood, but as a homeowner, if I'm burning something and it emits a smoke, regardless of whether it's wood or some other type of burning device, I can automatically assume this is probably something I should stay away from on no burn days.
Yes, that's correct. And there's also, you mentioned driving on January or New Year's Eve. We do have another issue besides wood burning smoke. We analyzed our data over the last few years, and on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, there's a significant spike in concentrations at our monitors from about 10 o'clock at night, New Year's Eve, to about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day. So we've had and we did the analysis and we found out that's from fireworks, so ground level fireworks.
That's right, and I think part of the thing that interests us the most about that data is while there is elevated concentrations between the 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock hour, there's actually a secondary spike that occurs shortly after the midnight hour on that New Year's Eve, New Year's Day type of an issue, which really correlates well to the chemical speciation that we've done. It's a fancy way of saying we've looked for the fingerprint of fireworks on our monitors, and we've found that to be an issue.
At the beginning of this program, we talked about the impact of not adhering to no burn days from a health standpoint and from an economic. Let's turn the subject around to what happens if these goals are not met. And I want to start first with the governmental impact from the government standpoint of what happens if you're not able to attain these goals.
Sure, and largely what happens in these particular situations is once you have enough data that shows that you're violating the health-based standard that is used across the country, air quality professionals like Director McNeely and myself will have to develop plans to reduce those air pollution concentrations. So the first thing that you do is you identify what contributes the most, and then you try to figure out ways to develop regulations to stop some of those activities from occurring. And so part of what we're trying to do through this no burn campaign is, number one, remember the neighbor and remember the public health impact. That alone should cause us all to be thinking about how can we do something better for the people that are impacted. But the secondary aspect is, like you said, an economic component, because there is a government regulation that will have to come forth and really then set forth all of the parameters about what we can and cannot do and when we can and cannot do those kinds of things. And so if we can take early action, we can prevent ourselves from having to develop regulations and actually benefit the public from that kind of a perspective.
And that's one thing, too, we really don't want to get to where it's mandatory requirements on businesses and residents. We think that the public, once they know, and that's the whole purpose of this campaign, that there is a health impact on their neighbors, we're hoping that they'll comply, and then we won't ever have to have a mandatory requirements, and we won't exceed the standard. And then in the meantime, you're helping your neighbors and helping your own family to have a healthier air.
And when you mentioned the impact on businesses, that's kind of where the economic component comes in terms of the economic impact.
That's precisely right, because when you're looking for all of the potential contributions, you're not looking at just a specific day, you're usually looking at what contributes to this entire issue. And one of the things that Director McNeely pointed out early in the segment was that annual concentrations of about 12 micrograms per cubic meter are what we're really concerned about. And so we'll be looking over the course of an entire year saying what contributes to that. And so there are businesses, things that burn diesel fuel. There are going to be other types of food establishments, grilling. Those kinds of things will be starting to come under the scrutiny of regulation and may have to actually make changes or add air pollution control devices, or in some cases stop operating in order for us to improve our air quality to the point where it's found to be healthy again.
Now, our law enforcement agencies always use the phrase, and rightly so, don't take the law into your own hands. We don't ask the residents to necessarily take the restrictions into their own hands in terms of enforcement, but if I'm a neighbor and I see on a no-burn day, if I see a neighbor burning wood and it's fairly obvious, what steps do I take to get that curtailed?
Yeah, if you have a good relationship with your neighbors, hopefully you can just talk to them and say, hey, this is causing a health impact, and there are regulations to not burn on high pollution days. And they can hopefully make the argument where their neighbor will be a good neighbor and not burn when it's a no burn day. But if they don't feel comfortable doing that, they can report it. And we do have that mobile app, which I'll read again. It's Clean Air Make More. You can download that and you can actually report a violation on that app. There's actually a complaint line, 602-372-2703. You can call that line and report it, and we can send an inspector out, and we can give warnings and actually fine up to $250 if they don't comply with the law.
And it's in the past, how dutiful have citizens been in your experience in terms of calling and making use of the complaint line?
We do get dozens of calls, mainly on weekends during the holiday season, and we will send inspectors out.
That's right. And I think part of it too is we're also looking for these particular issues, right? The monitors are going to help tell us what the air quality is, and I know that Maricopa County takes that very seriously and is looking for those particular issues independent of a complaint. But one of the things that you always hear from people is, well, gosh, it's just my neighbor's fire, it's just my fire, I'm just one person, does it really matter? And I think one of the things that's always worth pointing out to people is that in previous years, some of our worst concentrations have come from a fire directly next to a monitor. And in particular on January 1st, 2014, we had one night that is essentially the equivalent of 2 weeks of bad air quality on the one single night because of the fire, the burn barrel that was operating very close to our monitor. Well, a lot of people would say, gosh, that monitor isn't close to me, how am I really having that impact? Well, the monitor is representative of what your neighbor's experiencing right next door. And so it's always important to remember that even though it may not be a complaint, it may not be seen as, well, I'm just one person, that one person actually can have a tremendous impact, maybe not valley-wide, but necessarily they will have that impact on their neighbor in those particular cases.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that thought occurred to me as well, that if you have a neighbor who has a respiratory issue, then one person violating a no-burn day can have an impact, because the smoke just hangs in the air. And even though you're saying, well, that person may say, well, what difference does one person make? They can make a big difference.
Absolutely right. I think one person can make all the difference in the world. And again, we talked about it earlier in the segment. It's an impact on your neighbor. It's also an impact on people that you wouldn't normally expect because of where it sits down and pollutes in terms of the basin. And the fact that the folks in South Phoenix are going to be subject to smoke from all over the valley. And pictures bear that out. There's a blanket of smoke that typically covers the entire Phoenix basin on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, and New Year's Eve.
And again, just very quickly before we go to a break, we've talked about the atmospheric conditions that lead to no-burn days. It isn't just, you don't just assume that if we get a 20-mile-an-hour breeze the next day that everything's fine. You still need to check with the app or whatever means, social media, radio or television, to find out what the status of things are.
Yeah, and that's correct. Yeah, it's and the weather can change from day to day too, so it's a daily thing, and DEQ does do the forecast. So they should check every day before they burn.
That's exactly right. Mother Nature will offer some help, but just because it offers help tomorrow doesn't help the people that are experiencing that smoke condition today.
Now, in terms of the health factors and the impact that bad smoke has on no-burn days, when you don't adhere to the standards, we'll discuss that coming up in our next segment right after this break.
Do you play basketball? How's the weather up there? How's the air up there?
Hi, I'm Ralph Sampson, Basketball Hall of Famer and Valley resident. At 7'4", I get this all the time. The air up here is the same for me as it is for you. When people burn wood on no-burn days, the air is unhealthy for all of us.
On a no-burn day, don't burn wood.
Welcome back. Now joining me is Barbara Burkholder with the Arizona Asthma Coalition. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you.
I find this interesting. I want to ask you about the irony of the air particles that can cause the most problem for people with respiratory issues. But let's start with a basic question. The smoke that collects during this time of year, how does it most affect the general population?
Well, people would be surprised to know that 1 out of every 3 people in the valley or in the population is affected in some way, because the PM 2.5 is an irritant. So once that irritant gets to you, it can affect your eyes, and many people will report that their eyes are stinging, even though something else might not happen to them. But most people at risk, at the highest risk, are older folks or children or people who already have a heart or lung disease.
It's ironic because the PM 2.5 you mentioned is one of the smallest particles that's regulated. Very difficult to detect by the naked eye, but it's one of the most dangerous.
It is, and it's the size, 1/30th the size of a human hair. And as your previous guest discussed, it gets deep down into the lungs. The problem is it gets deeply down and you can't cough it up. So it stays there. It gets into the bloodstream, and then it can affect the heart. So it's not just lung irritation, but it's also circulatory irritation that can be caused by this. That's pretty serious, and we're all breathing that. So whether or not you have a disease, even if you're a really healthy person, that PM 2.5 that you're breathing during those bad air days gets down to the base of your lung, and it stays there for your life.
And just to confirm, so that our viewers understand, that particle, PM 2.5, it is emitted by burning wood.
That's true.
Now, do you see, we've talked about earlier in the program about the increase in no-burn days during the winter months and the atmospheric conditions that lead to that. Do you see an increase in hospital visits because of bad air during the winter time?
Yes, there are increase in hospital visits, and they can be for cardiac disease or for pulmonary disease. You can find Phoenix Children's Hospital, for example, may have a lot more children who have serious asthma attacks during that time, and it could certainly spoil a whole family's holiday.
It's surprising to me in one respect because you mentioned the pulmonary impact, the fact that the particle gets into the heart. So the impact to someone is not just a matter of I'm coughing, my eyes are stinging. It can have a circulatory effect as well.
Yes, that's not as well known. It can actually cause angina or heart pain, and people who have COPD or emphysema could be seriously affected. It can actually cause bronchitis. So even a normal healthy person could, in fact, if they're exposed to this for a long time, get bronchitis, and that can certainly end you up in the hospital. But
Now,
these pulmonary diseases, which are called lower respiratory diseases, are the 3rd cause of death in Arizona as well. So we have to take this seriously, and heart disease is probably the 1st or 2nd cause of death. So the small particles are affecting both the pulmonary and the cardiac systems.
Having said all that, I start to think to myself, when we talk about no-burn days and the app where you can find out if it's a no-burn day, that's not just a good thing to have if you own a fireplace and should I burn, should I not burn. if I have asthma, if I have any kind of respiratory issue, even if I don't, if I'm just looking to just stay healthy, you want to have that app or have the ability to determine if there's a no-burn day, because if they're saying don't burn, that tells me as somebody who may be asthmatic, it's not a good day to go outside either.
That's right. In fact, among the things that we advise is on days that they call for PM 2.5, that people who are at risk should stay indoors and keep their windows closed. And the other thing that they should do is don't light your fireplace. Don't burn anything inside your house. Candles wouldn't be a very good idea, and certainly don't be around anyone who's smoking a cigarette indoors.
That's interesting you bring up candles, because you wouldn't think, and again, this goes back to the small size of PM 2.5, you wouldn't think that a candle, which doesn't necessarily give off smoke all the time, would be that much of a risk, but you're saying it is.
But just think, if it's a 2-day warning, and you're keeping your windows closed for 2 days, then everything that you do inside your house is accumulating. It's not getting aerated out. You don't have an air conditioner on in the winter. You might have your furnace on or your heater, but air may not be circulating. So whatever you do inside your house is probably going to stay there if you're really being cautious. And in fact, if you begin to feel symptoms, the best thing to do is make sure, if you're an asthma patient, is to follow your asthma plan, because that plan will tell you what you're supposed to do if you begin to feel symptoms. But anyone else who begins to feel symptoms should certainly contact their health provider. Be safe. Just use your common sense.
Is there a time of day that's better than others if you're going to have to do something outside, even if the air quality is not leading to a no-burn day?
Well, for people who are at risk, I would certainly not recommend that they go out and do something energetic like running. That's probably off the table.
Right.
I would say on any days when it's close to or above the standards. I'm not enough of a technical expert to know what time of day would be best, but as Eric and Philip just told you, the nighttime tends to get worse because the cooler air at the nighttime is causing more of these particulates to settle with almost a blanket on top of them. So if the air gets warmer, I would think, just by common sense, it might be a little bit better part of day to be outdoors when it's warmer.
And I also want to just expand on something you were mentioning a moment ago. So often people may have pre-existing conditions before this time of year occurs, but you just mentioned the fact that people can develop breathing issues and breathing illnesses because of the quality of the air.
I think that there would be a risk for that if you are an older person, for example. A young, healthy teenager or a middle-aged adult who's healthy is probably not so much at risk. But someone who is older, who may be healthy, might be the person who would be at risk for developing bronchitis.
Is there a website that people can go to get just general tips and what to stay away from, the do's and don'ts as far as the Asthma Coalition is concerned?
Well, I think the wonderful website that I'm recommending is the Lung Association, and that address is www.lung.org/lung-disease/asthma. They have a full array of very good tips for people with asthma.
Barbara, I appreciate you coming down and sharing that information with us, and I thank you for being here. And I'd also like to thank Philip McNeely, Eric Massey, and most of all, you, the viewers. You, the residents of Maricopa County, are the most important factor in helping keep our air clean and our residents healthy year-round, but especially during the No Burn campaign. So please, on no burn days, don't burn wood.